Hey friends, it's Heidi M, and I'm actually back with my tally and sort of final TIFF or the Toronto International Film Festival 2024 edition of my experience at this year's festival. So in terms of my tally, this year I managed to see 31 films in total. That is a breakdown of 4 short films, 27 feature films, and documentaries. I attended 3 industry events and one in conversation with filmmaker Steven Soderbergh. And I also attended the Visionaries talk with Alfonso Cuaron, Mexican filmmaker. So that was from the industry side of things. In terms of socializing, I managed to make it to about 3 parties and 1 happy hour with the industry folks at TIFF. And overall, I did about 10 interviews. Yes, I did 10 interviews. My website, hyemusings.ca, has a lot of my coverage already up. There might be a couple of items still pending just because I need to do some edits on an interview that I am still sort of finalizing for you. So again, hyemusings.ca is the place to go for the tally and actually the final list of films. What I wanted to tell you today is very briefly give you my list of favorites. And by favorites, I mean my personal favorites, the films that have stayed with me, the films that I tried to champion while I was at the festival this year, and that also are part of my coverage. So the list that I'm going to read to you or set out for you here, it's not in any way in order. It's just films that I was tallying as I was going along in terms of the ones that I found really moving and personally impactful. I want to start with the short film Welema by Shalan Jodri. You might have heard me talk about this before. It is about the picking of sweetgrass and how the action of picking the sweetgrass also becomes a word and the meaning of all of that together. I did a spotlight on this short film, so you can see that on my website. Next, I have Paying for It by Soo-Kyin Lee, and it is an adaptation of the Chester Brown graphic novel. And it's a film about love, about sex, and about non-monogamy for adults who are reconsidering heteronormative relationships or lifestyles. I found this film really interesting and very thought-provoking. And I also did an interview with the filmmakers. So again, you can find that on my SoundCloud channel under Hye Musings. Next is a documentary, Ernest Cole, Lost and Found, by filmmaker Raoul Peck. And the filmmaker draws upon a chesterful, if you will, of unpublished images by photographer Ernest Cole, who was a South African photographer and was basically exiled from his country because of the work that he was doing during apartheid. A moving film filled with so many thought-provoking themes, and it garnered a lot of discussion. And that was one of the conversations that I attended during the industry time at TIFF with Raoul Peck, and he provided some really great insights on this film. I believe that it's going to be released sometime in the near future, so stay tuned for that. That's Ernest Cole, Lost and Found. Next, I have Super Boys of Maligon by Rima Cagti. I've talked about this film on my YouTube channel too and on my website. It is a film based on the life of Nasir Shaq, an amateur filmmaker from the town of Maligon in India. It is a film that is for cinema lovers, for people who want to feel represented and seen on screen. And it's just an all-around charming film, Super Boys of Maligon. Next, I have Aberdeen by filmmakers Ryan Cooper and Eva Thomas. And it is a story about a woman played by Gail Maurice, whose name in the film is Aberdeen. And basically, she is having to rise above hardships to save her grandkids, but also herself. A tour de force performance is described in the synopsis, and I would agree with that. Gail Maurice is great in this film. You can hear more about it from the filmmakers. I do have an interview with them as well. Next, I have Pedro Paramo by Rodrigo Prieto. Rodrigo Prieto is a cinematographer, but also arraying into directing now. This is his first directorial job, and it is a story that is based on a book. and it does have magic realism tones in it. Cinematically speaking, it looks great on screen because, of course, Rodrigo Prieto knows what he's doing, and so does his team. And it is sort of set in an abandoned Mexican town where past and present seem to coexist. And it really deals with some really interesting topics that are really, I guess, interesting to explore, whether or not you've read the book. I had not read the book, and I still was able to follow the story quite well. So that's Pedro Páramo. I also want to highlight another documentary called The Freedom of Fierro by Santiago Estenu from Mexico. And this is a story that I've sort of followed for 10 years. I spoke with the filmmaker this year and the editor of the film. You can see that on my website. It follows newly freed Cesar Fierro, who must rebuild his life after being wrongfully sentenced to death in Texas 40 years earlier. Compelling film. Cesar Fierro will just, I don't know, he'll move you, he'll mark you, it'll get right here. I think there's a lot to think about when it comes to incarceration in the US and human rights violations, and also with everything that's been going on recently in this week of September 20 is 26 today. So it is with a bit of a heavy heart that I talk about this film, but you know, again, it's a documentary that brings to light a lot of the struggles of inmates that have been wrongfully accused, and they're literally fighting for their life. So that is The Freedom of Fierro. Next, I have Universal Language by Matthew Rankin. This is a Canadian film that was also submitted to the Oscars for consideration under the international film category. This is Matthew Rankin's second film and is a charming story of a Canada where Persian and French are the two official languages. And there are some undertones of loneliness, and it's set in Winnipeg. The sense of humor in this film really is charming, and there's a lot to sort of unpack as you're watching the film in terms of family connections and also an homage to the Tim Hortons, of course. So that is Universal Language. Next, I want to highlight So Surreal Behind the Masks by Neil Diamond and Joanne Robertson. And in this documentary, they're looking at the connection between the work of famed surrealist artists and Yupik and Kawakawak ceremonial masks and the quest to bring some of those masks back home. I did a spotlight on this film. You can also read more about it and hear more about it on my website. Next, I have a short film called Quota by the team of Job Roggeveen, Joris Oprins, and Marieke Blauw from the Netherlands. And it's an animated short, and it's super, super duper funny. It's a parable that suggests kind of an extreme means of getting people to think about their footprint in the world, like the carbon footprint, if you catch my meaning. It's super funny. It is dark humor a bit. And it gets to the point in less than 3 minutes. I think it's probably been submitted to the Oscars as well. And the filmmakers didn't come to TIFF this year because they're also trying to make a point of not flying to not add to this carbon footprint. Quota, short film, loved it. Next, I have the Feel Good Films, The Life of Chuck by Mike Flanagan, which kind of takes a detour from his sort of dark films or TV series to kind of adapt a really interesting Stephen King novella that looks at an ordinary accountant and sort of what his life is about, and giving us things to think about in terms of life and death and what we do with our lives, essentially. So that's Life of Chuck. That was the TIFF's People's Choice Award winner. Is it a film that is cinematically epic? No, but it was a feel-good film, so hence I can understand why people voted for it. Next, I have a documentary, Paul Anka, His Way by John Maggio. And it's basically about one of the world's most prolific and iconic singer-songwriters who actually participates in this film very candidly. And frankly, I grew up listening to this music when I was a child. So I have some great memories of listening to these songs with my grandfather, for example, and one of my uncles. And Paul Anka, you wouldn't believe, but he's actually written so many songs. Some of them are even current. So that's Paul Anka, His Way. Next, I have my only Midnight Madness film, The Guess We Do's by Kenichi Ugana, who I managed to meet this year. Thank you, Peter Kaplowski, for bringing this to TIFF. It's a horror-themed rock band that moves to the Japanese countryside to write their greatest punk anthem in the world. It is such another charming film. I laughed so much with one of my really great friends at this screening, and frankly, all the references to the horror films in this particular movie will honestly resonate for a lot of genre fans. So that's The Guess We Do's, and fingers crossed that we can get it back here in Toronto or in Canada sometime again soon. Next, I have One Up the Hill by Samuel Van Grinspen. And in this film, it stars Dacre Montgomery and Vicky Krieps as they give us some really interesting performances in this atmospheric ghost story that is basically looking at the legacy of loss and dark family secrets and how we try to rebuild our own lives and our stories in a way after we learn more truths from our parents and other loved ones. This film was it stayed with me in the sense of the visuals and because it is atmospheric, the soundscape and the music that was part of the film. And I actually spoke with the composer of that film. You can also learn more of that and hear more about that on my SoundCloud channel. And in terms of my other favorites, I have Beloved Tropic by Ana Endara. And she is a documentary filmmaker, but this is her first feature, and is set in Panama City in the sense of building a connection between a pregnant Colombian immigrant woman and a well-to-do matriarch with dementia, and sort of the relationship that builds because they both, at first, don't know that they need each other, but they benefit from one another as well. So that is Beloved Tropic. So those are my faves, personally, and I just want to list 4 honorable mentions. The Damned by Roberto Minervini, which is a period drama that is philosophical and thought-provoking. I keep saying that, but I really do mean it. I've thought about these films quite a bit. And in The Damned, he is portraying a group of volunteer Civil War soldiers on the Western frontier. And the way that he sets the story, you're not sure where we are. We know that we're back in time, obviously, during the Civil War in the US, but it's just the themes that come up in this. Super interesting visually. Always a pleasure to see Roberto Minervini's films on a big screen. That's The Damned. Next, I want to have an honorable mention to The Wolves Always Come at Night, which is another hybrid documentary by Gabrielle Brady. And it's about a unique it's a unique, deeply emotional and personal story about a couple who live in Mongolia, and it's set amidst climate change that really affects their livelihood, and they're deciding to leave their town and perhaps move to the city, and all of that sort of what happens after a huge storm affects them and their home, and they now need to sort of pick up the pieces and figure out what to do with their lives. So that's The Wolves Always Come at Night. Next, I want to shout out Victor by Olivier Sarbal. I did a slight like a mini spotlight on this film, which focuses on the life of a deaf person and his name Victor, and his experience in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Again, very interesting because it's also set in black and white, and it has the way that it's edited, it also gives us the experience of what the world would be like for Victor, who has almost no hearing. And lastly, I also want to shout out Freedom Way by Afolabi Olalekan. I did an interview with the film director and one of the writers as well. And it's basically about a startup that faces unfavorable government laws and police harassment, which causes ripples effects in the lives of about 9 people. Very interesting film. It's one that I hope that it gets a bit more traction, and I would like to see where it goes next. So those are my favorites and honorable mentions. I should have the full list available on my website, highmusings.ca. You can also go there to see other write-ups and other spotlights that I've done for the festival. And of course, on all my socials at Hye Musings, you can see all of the other stories that I've posted in terms of my time at TIFF. It was great. It was fun. I'm now tired and I gotta move on to the next.